Hello, this is Lisa Muggeridge talking again. This is an unplanned video which is a response to the announcement that in Wales there will be a rollout of a universal basic income model, and it's being rolled out by the Liberal Democrats. So I wanted to do this video to talk a little bit about what universal basic income is and what it isn't, and what it will do and what it definitely won't do. Because it's basically used as a shorthand for people to say something's gone wrong with our welfare system, we're not sure what, but we think it should be less mean. And it's actually a very dangerous model. Now, universal basic income is the suggestion that if we replace our welfare system with a flat rate payment for everybody in the country, that somehow this will solve our welfare problems. It will not. Now, it's important to understand that the failure to understand how a benefit system behaves is not the fault of a single political party. 20th century economists did not bother to learn how a cash transfer system behaves as part of the economy. They just never bothered. When I got to the LSE, I found this out, and they're using bullshit economic modelling shaped by media narratives that they assume will go on forever in a period where that left-right tribalism is over and where the political press are generating political crisis. We saw with the death of the Labour Party, this stemmed from a social movement where they had people like Owen Jones going out subordinating welfare claimants so that their welfare policy would be undiscussed. It generated a death toll of 100,000 people. It generated the death of the Labour Party, and we still have our welfare problems, including a £20 billion universal credit system, which is actually reshaping itself through crisis as we speak, because nobody knows how to fix it. Now, the biggest chunk of our welfare spending goes on housing subsidy. This is generally paid out through local housing allowance or housing benefit. Now, the housing market is central to our economic functioning as a country. The value of the housing market changes according to economic conditions, and it changes according to geography. The price of a house in London is not the same as the price of a house in Tamworth. The price of a flat in Newcastle is not the same as the price of a flat in Todmorden. These are benefits which are administered locally by the local authority. A local authority is a collection of institutions and duties who have evolved from the ground up to reflect the baseline of statutory responsibility. Our housing benefits system is shaped by this and by the housing market. Now, in 2001, there was a one pilot which I worked on, which tried to bring together the benefits agency, which became the DWP, the employment service, which administered job seekers allowance, and local authorities. And it very quickly became apparent why local authorities could not do this. When universal credit was mooted by Ian Duncan Smith, he will have been told repeatedly by civil servants that this could not be delivered. But unfortunately, because our trade unions and the Labour Party were focused on a social movement subordinating welfare claimants, nobody bothered to tell government this. Universal basic income cannot respond to a housing market or fulfil these functions, but these functions cannot be abdicated by government. Instead, we have to use the data our housing benefit system produces to warn us about overheating in the housing market. I was able to accurately predict that the end of the post-war settlement was here and accurately model and predict events because I used that data. We do not use it because the economics that they're using currently is the economics that died as the 20th century ended, which has this bullshit welfare shit at its core. We actually need to use our housing benefit data to inform us about decision making, about interest rates, about the performance of our housing market. Now, it's not just housing. The only universal life stage that we all experience, there are two: birth and death. One of them is already covered by child benefit. Now, child benefit is a very simple to administer benefit which is applicable to every child. You register your child when they are born. And then we have a data source about every person in the country. We use it to guide national insurance number issuing. We use it as a passport to other systems because birth is universal. This is a very useful system which has been slightly undermined by attempts to make it income related, where we've then needed policy to offset where you have to register with it anyway. Now, with children comes new realities, new economic realities. The welfare system that we had is built around a legacy breadwinner and female carer model that no longer exists. When I was at the LSE, I was told that there are two types of families, single parent and two parent. I said, I'm really sorry, but heterogeneity of family forms is not contested, and this emerges through our family court system. But the economics we are using does not recognise this because their data modelling cannot accommodate it. This is where you have systems which cross over the market economy, the family, childcare, housing, all these systems linked together around families with children. The tax credit system, universal credit system, provide an accurate imprint of the part-time labour market, of the childcare market, which brings us to childcare itself. The UK is defined as we have a private childcare market, which is regulated by government, which is about legal responsibilities that parents hold, but which is provided by a patchwork, a lot of different providers. A day nursery for a baby, so you can work for 3 days, is significantly different cost-wise to an after-school club for a 7-year-old, so that they can be picked up from school when you finish work. This is a variable market. Universal basic income cannot respond to it, but these responsibilities can't be abdicated, so it immediately creates a two-tier system with subordination of these systems and a demand that we don't use that data because instead we have this flat rate payment that does nothing. Now, the next issue is disability. Now, the 20th century saw increased rights and recognition around issues of disability, race, and sex. This is new. This has never happened before. But the payments that welfare systems make on the basis of disability are not about employment. They are about the extra cost of living in an able-bodied focused society when you have a disability. Extra transport costs, different food costs, care costs. The use of our welfare system to abuse kind of disabled people is still ongoing with our PIP system, which currently has a 5-month processing time and which has distorted our courts and tribunal service and nobody knows how to fix. That's because we've been using a welfare economics that separated itself from what disability is and use media narratives and this bullshit economics to say we can just use it to abuse people. I recently claimed PIP, and on the telephone when I rang in, this is people in hospices, this is people with terminal illnesses. This has generated political crisis and we have to move beyond it. UBI does not do this. It just creates a sump floor in the economy, which means that there is a two-tier welfare system and recreates these problems. Now, the next issue is unemployment. One of the reasons our unemployment benefit system was structured the way it was because if people were willing to sign on once a fortnight and say I'm unemployed, this was the best measure we had of our unemployment figures because companies don't have to declare this. The unemployment benefit system was a tiny proportion of our benefit system with a huge amount of conditionality demanded by political narratives. The attempts to expand that conditionality to the working population through universal credit have generated massive crisis, but they've also left us unable to count our unemployment figures. In order to manage the economy, we need to know how much unemployment we have, how much self-employment we have. We don't currently have that data because of the punitive use of this system. UBI does not address this. It does not allow us to use this data. It just pretends the problem doesn't exist. Now, in terms of cost, if you take UBI for 1 week in this country, you're talking about 64 million people receiving a £70 payment. That's money the Treasury can't afford, which goes nowhere. In addition, by ignoring the political inequality that actually exists, what you ignore is that very quickly people would fight to keep that £70 at the expense of the rest of the things our welfare system covers, which can't be abdicated. The movement that Labour manufactured to subordinate welfare claimants, the anti-cuts movement, the opposition to trans rights activism, they demonstrated how quickly elite social capture of social movements happens. With austerity, it was basically 10 years of Labour using our trade unions and showing how badly our trade unions function to subordinate welfare claimants, while a death toll of 100,000 people was generated. With the opposition to trans rights, it took about a week after the Gender Recognition Act review before elite social closure had captured the movement, and it was about the centre-left, the far-right and existing middle-class paradigms. You would very quickly end up with a very powerfully protected £70 a week of the middle classes being used to further abuse people harmed by our welfare system. It is a sad fact, and as somebody who was very, very much harmed by austerity's focus on single parents and failure to use welfare properly, it's uncomfortable for me to say, but the public demanded that. After the financial crisis, the public wanted a punitive response to welfare claimants to show that something was being done about the financial crisis that didn't impact their mortgages. The crisis have resulted in the death of the Labour Party and 100,000 dead people. And we're still scared to face this. Universal basic income is a way to avoid saying this. It's essentially putting a sump floor in your economy, creating a two-tier welfare system with a very well protected £70 that's going nowhere and doing nothing. Now, in terms of economic stimulus, UBI is incredibly useful. A payment to everybody in the country would kickstart the economy in a period like the period coming out of coronavirus. Tax credits just recently gave a £500 payment to every person covered by tax credits. And this will show up on the growth figures for next month because it immediately will have created local spending. This money will have gone straight into the economy. But long-term use of UBI just creates a two-tier welfare system and reinforces all our welfare problems and demands that we do not use the data which we now have to understand that we use at a Treasury and Monetary Policy Committee level. So that's basically what I've put underneath is an article I wrote a few years ago, questions you should ask anybody selling you a universal basic income model. Now, I guarantee you they will not get past question 2 without saying you need a two-tier system and you need to liquidate one system. In order to have a universal basic income model, we would have to liquidate social care and housing subsidy, and we could not do that because statutory responsibilities mean that we are obliged to provide this. Coronavirus is exposing the weaknesses in systems worldwide, and what we should find as coronavirus ends is that we come into a new consensus where people understand that you need these systems as a bottom line and they can't be abdicated anymore. What UBI is kind of a last gasp of neoliberal economics and just somebody telling you that they don't understand how our cash transfer systems work. But that's because economists of the 20th century never bothered to learn. The 21st century will be defined by them learning. Now, that was an unplanned video as a response to that announcement. I will be back tomorrow with that video about Neolithic China, and I will be back on Wednesday with the video as part of the series about what keeps the UK stable, looking at the UK's relationship with the US and with Europe, particularly post-Brexit. I'm still crowdfunding £350 for equipment and research materials. And also, I've just discovered that Patreon is a really good place to talk to people. And you can actually, I don't know if you need to make a contribution or not, I haven't checked, but you can actually message me through Patreon, and I really like speaking to people through that platform. So, thank you very much for letting me get this off my chest today, and thank you for listening. I hope the article about questions to ask people selling a UBI model is useful, and that was my response to the pilot that's been launched in Wales for universal basic income. Thank you for listening.